is troubled.
Yea, verily. I cannot marry thee, Ophelia.
Oh.
There is nothing left for you but to get thee to a notary.
I just wanted to let you know about my study group.
Oh, don't be a fuddy-duddy. I'll be your study buddy.
I'm about to embark on one of the great challenges of my scientific career.
This work right here is going to change history.
I think this is going to be our greatest mission.
I don't have time to study. I'll never get into Stanford.
I got big plans for you tonight. I got maps, I got charts. I got to see you through this because my credibility is on the line.
It's at this point that you'll want to start taking notes.
Welcome to the Sitcom Study, the podcast where we contemplate the TV shows we grew up with and search for the truth and wisdom within the tropes and cliches. And Amy, Mary, pray tell, forsooth, what shall I inquire? Is thou a trope we shall discuss heretofore?
Put you right now out of your misery.
On this podcast morrow.
Oh boy. You know, I was so impressed with you when you were talking about the 5-act structure.
I've got lots of legit Shakespeare knowledge.
You do. That was very fun.
Yes, it's hard to do the sort of like, oh yeah, we'll just add thou and hast at the end of everything.
I'm going to throw in some Shakespearean ad-libs. Not quite at that level of Sir
Ian McKellen.
I was thinking of the older one.
Laurence Olivier.
Yes, Sir Laurence Olivier. Not quite at his level yet, huh? Okay.
What is our trope?
Well, I think we know. Our trope is Shakespeare.
Yep, we're talking about Shakespeare in sitcoms. There was a lot to choose from here. Lots of episodes over the years where sitcom characters either act out a Shakespeare play or the sort of events of the show are sort of a reference to a Shakespeare play. Right. Mm-hmm. There are so many that we decided to narrow it down and focus specifically on the Hamlet ones. We're going to be talking about the melancholy Dane here. That's something I learned this morning as a way to refer to Hamlet.
That's right. Sweet Prince.
So way back when we did our community theater episode, I, asked you about your experience with the stage, mostly for the benefit of our listeners, because I knew, of course, that you're a frequent community theater actor and you're deeply involved in the theater. But Shakespeare is not something that comes up a lot. So I am kind of curious, what is your sort of relationship with Shakespeare? Is this something you were really into at some point? Or now?
Kind of. Yeah. I mean, a little bit. Yeah. So I was that kid who I could get by in high school without actually having to read the books. The teacher always told you everything they needed you to know anyway. Mm-hmm. And so I would kind of maybe Cliff's Notes it, maybe skim a few chapters if I knew there was going to be a particular quiz. But I always broke that rule, or maybe followed the rule when it was Shakespeare. So the ones we had to read in high school, I am familiar with. And then in terms of just, you mentioned community theater. Could I ask?
I'm curious because I remember year by year we always had one Shakespeare play per year. Mm-hmm. They were all the tragedies, no comedies. Do you remember the ones you read in high school?
Yeah, and we didn't have one a year. We just had Hamlet and, we did Romeo and Juliet in freshman year and Hamlet in sophomore year. And then it was on to, more modern, like literature, American lit. And then my senior year had a teacher who was super into like the Beowulf, the Grendel, and like the super old, like medieval Canterbury Tales and stuff. So yeah, I think only those two in high school did I read. But that would be for English class. But I've, read others at other times for theater stuff. And that was what I was going to say. Like my passing acquaintance became more of, a little bit of a love affair, I think, when I got into the theater and started doing stuff with that. Huge fan of the musical Kiss Me, Kate, which is
Taming of the
Shrew. And then we were also, I think like seniors in high school, maybe you were a freshman in college when 10 Things I Hate About You came out. Yep. And a bunch of those, like She's the Man, which is 12th Night. And I mean, we were a little older when that one happened, but like all of those. So I really enjoyed that. But yeah, there was a period of time there, and I'm going to call it from like 98 to about 2010. So about 10 years. Where I was just super into Shakespeare. I did A Midsummer Night's Dream. I did Hamlet. Lady Macbeth is a dream role. Like, I would love to do that. Yeah. And also anything like Taming of the Shrew adjacent. I think that would be really fun. I know that show is kind of like canceled now because of the turnabout that happens at the end.
Yeah, whatever.
But I think you can pull it up in a modern way and make it work, but not everybody agrees with me. And Much Ado. Much Ado is a big favorite of mine. And then when you and I met, we kind of had a little bit of I kind of had a little resurgence of that because we watched some of the things like I had never heard of, that musical one.
Love's Labour's Lost.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Kenneth Branagh version from the late 90s that turns it into a musical with Cole Porter standards.
Yeah, which I don't think I remember ever even hearing of until I met you, and I was like, whoa, this is great. Can we watch this again?
Yeah. I was really into Shakespeare too. This was a big thing in the 90s in general. This was, and you've already mentioned some of the examples of it, you know, the pervasiveness of Shakespeare and sort of bringing it back in hip ways was ubiquitous in our culture. And I sort of played right into that, you know, so I was thinking about this all morning, how the 90s were such a Shakespeare heavy time. The person we mainly have to thank for that, of course, is Mr. Kenneth Branagh, right?
Yeah, we can thank Kenneth Branagh, but also Tom Stoppard.
Well, yeah, Tom Stoppard, of course. I was in a production of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. That's great. And yeah, there's lots of things in that soup. But 1989, we were a little young for this, but that's when Henry V, the Kenneth Branagh version of that, comes out. And that was a huge hit. And I think a lot of people consider that kind of responsible for the sort of onslaught that we would get over the next 10 years. There's not one, not two, but three major Hollywood versions of Hamlet in the 90s. Mel Gibson played him in 91. You have the Kenneth Branagh version in 96. And then there's an Ethan Hawke version from 1999 with Bill Murray in it. That one is all modernized.
Oh,
and
yeah. I sort of vaguely remember that too.
But yeah, just to name a few, the Richard III with Ian McKellen from 1995, which is sort of updated to like a World War II kind of thing. Really, really good. There's the Much Ado About Nothing, the Branagh version with Denzel Washington and Keanu Reeves. I think that was the one that for us that were a little bit young for Henry V, that kind of got us on board. Not that we liked it, but we were at least aware of it.
Well, and it was Keanu and he was super cool.
Yeah. And then in the late 90s, you started getting all of the Shakespeare adjacent things like you're talking about. 10 Things I Hate About You, Shakespeare in Love, you know, these things that it's like, it's not the exact play. It's either...
Well, and Shakespeare in Love was like, it was a soup, right? It was like three of them all in one.
Yes, and the sort of fictionalized, fanciful version of it. And I would even throw in there stuff like Clueless. You know, that's not Shakespeare, obviously. It's Jane Austen. But the same kind of thing of like, oh, what's old is new again.
The modern adaptation
Isn't it kind of cool?
of,
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, there was that became like Julia Stiles' thing, right? Like she just did adaptations.
But okay, so now that we've set the context, what are our shows? What did we watch?
All right, we watched Gilligan's Island, Season 3, Episode 4, The Producer, Happy Days, Season 2, Episode 10, A Star is Bored, Head of the Class, Season 1, Episode 8, Critical Choices, and Frasier, Season 8, Episode 12, The Show Must Go Off.
Yeah, so we've talked about Gilligan's Island a couple times before. This is a very, very silly show. We've talked about how we didn't really watch it as kids, but of course we were aware of it. It's on the reruns and stuff. And
well, you speak for yourself.
Okay,
I watched a bit of it, yeah.
This one begins with they see a plane, flying over. So this must be just a common thing. Oh, there's a plane. Maybe it'll save us. Who knows? Like they don't even care that much.
No, because they always have guest stars.
Yeah, exactly.
People are constantly getting shipwrecked on this island, and then they get rescued, but the rest of the cast doesn't.
How do they get a radio signal? Because this begins with, before they even find out who's on the plane, we have Ginger, or Marianne, I always confuse them, but she's listening to like the latest Hollywood news on some like AM radio or something.
Yes.
Are we just not supposed to think about how they could get a radio signal on a remote island?
The professor has set it up. The professor can do everything. everything. He is a chemist, he is an engineer, and he is a psychologist, as well as a medical doctor.
All right, so he engineered a way to get radio waves that just aren't there.
He engineered a way to pick up radio waves from whatever was nearby.
Yeah, from very far away, but not to send radio waves to say, we are stranded, come save us.
No, well, so that's what the skipper says to Gilligan. Go get the radio. Let's see. We want to start broadcasting to make sure they can hear us.
Yeah.
Not sure why they're not broadcasting 24/7. Help, help, SOS.
Exactly.
But that's what he was like. They might have been listening for our signal.
So, yeah, we get a very silly sitcom-y setup. They see the plane go down in the distance. They're like, oh my God, the plane crashed. I hope whoever that is, I hope they're okay. And then we see this sort of like Jungle Cruise type like watercraft just sort of like coming up, right? And there's this dude on a little like little water paddle boat. I don't know what the hell you call it. But it's this guy all by himself. Just, again, sitcom-y as all get out. He's supposed to be, I guess, their version of Hollywood muckety muck, right?
So he is, I think he's a playoff of Harold Hecht, who was like a big shot producer at the time. It's Phil Silvers. So let's just start there.
That's the actor's name?
Yes.
I don't know who that is.
Yes, you do.
He had a vibe to me. He reminded me of Elliot Gould. He had that, like, obviously a much lower rent version, but yeah.
So Phil Silvers of The Phil Silvers Show, which was like the starting home of at least one of the sitcoms from like the 60s that we've talked about in the past. He was a vaudeville kid and then came up and then went out to the studio system and did, a bunch of pictures. He was in Mad World. And then when the studio system started kind of crumbling, he went back and started doing theater again and came back to New York. His company is producing Gilligan's Island. So,
all right, so this is kind of a meta commentary.
Yeah, so he gets a little...
Yeah, he's playing this fancy Hollywood producer, Harold Hecuba, and just immediately he's this sort of, I don't know, diva? I don't know if that's what you call it.
No, he's completely unaware. First of all, he's completely unaware that he has stumbled upon a deserted island because he thinks these people are just like there for him to boss around. So he kicks the Howells out of their hut and is like, this is the nicest hut on the island. It's a hovel, but I'll stay here.
He makes them his butler and maid.
Exactly. Like he tells everybody. And the reason they all agree to it is he's like, well, I've got a plane coming right behind me. He's dangling
the carrot of,
and they're going to rescue us. So what are you complaining about?
His whole attitude is just like, he doesn't acknowledge that it's like there's any danger in the situation or whatever. But I feel silly even like trying to indict the verisimilitude of this.
He's ridiculous. He comes, and look, like this is what he is known for. This kind of like kitschy, ridiculous, like over the top character thing. He's the first actor ever to win a Tony for the revival, a Best Actor Tony for the revival of a musical.
What musical?
A funny thing happened on the way before him. He turned it down. He turned down the lead role in its original run, realized he made a mistake, went back and said, I will do a bit part, because Zero Mostel was like huge, right? For the movie. He was like, when it came time for the movie, of course, Zero was going to take the role, but he was like, I'll do a bit part in the movie. And then when it came back around for the revival, he was like, I want in. And they were like, yes, yes, please. And he won a Tony for it. So yeah, like this is him, like that sort of like over the top, ridiculous, like what we think of as like Nathan Lane kind of now.
Yeah.
That's how, and like obnoxious. It's how he acts. It's who he is. So, or who he plays. And that's what this character is, right? So Ginger has been overhearing that he's flying around in his plane, stopping at random places, trying to scout for new hot talent. Mm-hmm. And then when she realizes that he's crash landed on this island, she comes out and like takes over Marianne's job as the waitress to come and try to like show off her acting skills.
Yes, which was a little confusing at first or bizarre. Again, these two young, pretty girl characters, I'm always kind of shaky on who they are anyway.
Well, and then when they wear wigs, you get real confused.
So when she comes out, one of them comes out to wait on this guy.
That would be Ginger.
She's got a wig on and doing like an Italian
She's
voice.
doing like an Esperanza from The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Right, so that is what I did not understand, because her second character was much more recognizable to me, but this first character character, I'm just like, why is she doing this? Why is she pretending to be Italian? It was kind of like the Screech's spaghetti sauce commercial from the Saved by the Bell, the over-the-top Italian accents. And yeah, so she I guess wants to show off her acting skills.
Her range, yes.
Right, while serving him.
And then she comes back and she's doing like a Marilyn Monroe. And
it's
she's
good.
Like, I just wanted to show off my range. And he laughs in her face and is like, you think that's range? That's over-the-top acting? I would never cast you in anything. Ha, ha, ha. And runs away. And like, is like,
she runs
her off.
away because, he scoffs at her and she's just like brokenhearted that he laughed at her audition, essentially.
Right. Well, and so just like last time, the last one of these that we watched, right?
Uh-huh.
Ginger had like a mental breakdown.
That's right.
Because somebody criticized her or whatever, or she was like hypnotized or something. But then so she thought she was somebody else. And the professor is like, we can't mess with her fragile state.
Right. We have to stage a show again.
Yes. So it's exactly the same response as the last time we watched Gilligan's Island. He's like, we can't mess up Ginger's fragile state. We have to stage a show where she can perform and then he can see how great she really is.
This one, at least, it's not just for her emotional benefit. Right. It is actually, they want to win him over. They want to give her a little showcase.
Yeah.
And so it's funny. They're like, well, okay, we can make a musical out of some pre-existing story. Let's look at these books we have.
And they say they have to do a musical because he only produces musicals.
He only produces musicals, and they have a little shelf of like 7 books. However many characters there are on the show, that's how many books they have, because
each one of them is like, oh wait, that was mine.
It's like there's one that's like, oh, skiffers and schooners that I have loved.
Yes,
something.
yes.
Like,
the schooner I once saw or something
Skipper's
like that.
Oh, that's mine. And then the other one, that was the only one I wrote
It was something
down.
about chemistry. Which was, again, I was like, and then the professor's like, that's mine. I'm like, really? Like chemistry? What? You're okay.
Yeah.
Thought you were a shrink. I don't know.
But one of them has a copy of Hamlet.
Yes.
And so they're going to get the idea to make a musical version of Hamlet.
Yes. And surprisingly, one of the record albums they have is Carmen, because all of the music from their musical version of Hamlet is the music from the opera Carmen.
Yeah.
For example, I am to be or not to be.
Yes. Now, let's get into this. So we're going to talk about 4 shows. We're going to get 4 versions of Hamlet in one way or another. They don't necessarily
We're always going to kind of get the to be or not to be part.
Yes. I think it's safe to say that the version we get in Gilligan's Island is the least faithful to the Immortal Bard's original material, right? Aside from being a musical.
I don't know. I mean, the Head of the Class version was pretty far off, too.
The Head of the Class one had actual Shakespearean text in it. This one, they did basically what I did at the start of the episode.
No,
they do the thou hast.
No, they would take one part of a line and then like the get thee to a nunnery,
exactly.
or
the
like
writers,
fast, or like whatever. Like I hear something.
They know the 4 or 5 key quotes from Hamlet, and that's about it. Because this is the only one, like, it gets the basic story structure of Hamlet completely wrong. It comes out first with someone comes out and sort of introduces it. He says, this is the story of a man who couldn't make up his mind. And that is going to be the only accurate thing to the Shakespeare that anyone says. And then Gilligan comes out as Hamlet. So already you got to wonder, this whole thing is supposed to be a showcase for Ginger. Why not at least do, like you said, Macbeth? That's the only Shakespeare play that has a really juicy part for a woman. But so, Gilligan comes out and starts going immediately. They do a song about to be or not to be, which any 10th grade kid knows happens in like Act 3 of Hamlet. Or I don't even know which act it is, but it's way in there.
You're not wrong, but this is an adaptation. This is a musical. They're going to do whatever they want with it.
But they don't even seem to understand the meaning of to be or not to be, because all of our subsequent shows will call out that basically is saying you're contemplating suicide.
Yes.
Whereas this, they do this fun little song, but he keeps rhyming it with to fight or flee.
Yes.
Which granted, like maybe in an existential way, you could say that is a metaphor for suicide, but it seems like they're just not even doing the basic homework of figuring out what the original thing is supposed to be. But we do have fun little songs.
Yeah, that's what I said. That's what I was going to say. I think they were just trying to find rhymes in the songs.
Yeah. So we have To Be or Not to Be, obviously. There's a part where he says, get thee to a notary, right?
Yes.
Which is a play on get thee to a nunnery. And then we have a song that the skipper and one of the other ones sings, which is built around, interestingly, I think the Hamlet quote that's going to be referenced the most in all of these shows, except for maybe To Be or Not to Be, which is neither a lender or a borrower be.
Neither
right?
a borrower nor a lender be. Yeah.
To me, that's kind of a deep cut for Hamlet. I wouldn't consider that like one of the big ones, but every one of these shows is going to hit on that. And this one, it's going to be a whole song that is, it's the skipper and Marianne as Polonius and Laertes.
Right. Which, by the way, Marianne, best actress in this whole little production.
Yeah. She's doing the opposite of she's pulling a Gwyneth Paltrow from Shakespeare in Love. She's doing the woman.
And she's also way too tan. And I noticed that in the very first scene with her that I was like, whoa, she's way too tan. Like, I mean, I don't know what's going on. It's like maybe she got a sunburn and so now they got extra makeup on her or something. She's way too tan.
This same song also works in the to thine own self be true quote. So I just want to keep track. That's like 5, I think, lines out of Hamlet we've got so far. Now, the way that they've done all this, we should say, the whole reason for this show is to impress this Harold Hecuba guy. They start the show with him still in bed. We cut to him waking up to this racket.
That's the thing, because the whole point was that they were going to rehearse, which is why I'm like, it wasn't until later when he did it in the same order that I was like, oh, they are just doing things out of order. Okay.
Oh, so this was just a rehearsal,
This was just a rehearsal,
okay.
And that was the whole thing. They were going to hide it from him. They were saying, there's no way we can hide from him that we're rehearsing. And Gilligan's like, no, he leaves us alone at night. We can rehearse at night.
Gotcha.
And then we can put on the show and he can see it. But he hears it. It wakes him up. And so he comes and he's like peeking through the bushes, watching this production. And then finally they get to the end. But
he strides up there.
He's like, no, you're doing it all wrong.
What he says is, up until now, there's been something rotten in the state of Denmark, right? So we just got to tick that box, that Hamlet quote. And he insists on directing the show. And we later find out and starring in it too.
Well, so then we have a sequence of him directing and like trying to get better performances out of everyone. And it's always no. And he's like, that's it. I'm calling it. See you tomorrow night. And then the next night we come back and he's like, you're going to see Hamlet the musical, how it's supposed to be done. And so then he does the whole thing. And if you've ever seen one of those like 15-minute Shakespeare, the complete works of Shakespeare abridged, or the 15-minute Hamlet, where they just like they do a whole play as fast as they possibly can, and like people are running back and throwing on wigs and putting pinafores on, and it's like back and forth and out. Yes, that's what's happening here. Except he's not actually changing clothes quickly. They're just doing this weird thing where they're shaking the camera to make it look like the stage is falling down.
Yeah, because he does run backstage, and yes, they do the Star Trek fakey camera shake thing, and then he runs back out. He also is interrupting himself to give himself notes, to go like, this is all wrong, start all over again.
Try it again.
It's very silly. And,
then he's telling the professor who's cranking the phonograph. The record player thing that they've made, he's cranking that, and he's like, it's too slow, go faster. And then he's like, I am to be or not to be. And it's really quick, and it's like, it's a bang up performance to just watch him.
Yeah,
like the last
wild.
5 minutes where you just watch him do those all back and forth is so funny.
Yeah, and then he eventually tires himself out and collapses and says, "Good night, sweet prince."
That's right.
So again, this episode is really the heaviest on quotes. Like you've got like
they
7.
They don't have the story, but they picked out the quotes.
Exactly. And I just also want to call out, Ginger did not get much. Obviously, she got no stage time in Harold Hecuba's version, but it's just so funny how it really seems like these sitcom writers forgot what the point of this story was supposed to be.
They gave her the solo. Like, she had a solo that was like a full song, whereas like, Gilligan's To Be or Not to Be song was like just a verse, kind of a thing, or just a chorus. And then the Howells song that everybody joins in and sings at the end.
Yeah, and so they find out the next next day that he skipped. The rescue boat came overnight.
Oh, the rescue plane? Or no, it said boat. That's right. He said it was going to be a plane, but then he left them a note that was like, oh, the rescue boat came in the middle of the night. I didn't want to wake you guys.
Yeah, so predictably, he screwed them over. And again, this whole thing was just so silly. It's almost like beneath comment in terms of like the logic of
right.
it.
But then they hear on the radio, and this is the reason why he screwed them over, because he stole their idea, and now he's producing in Hollywood the first musical version of Hamlet.
Yeah. So look, I think, in terms of tracking the trope, I think it's pretty clear, just like we talk about with the Olympics and everything else, like Shakespeare, it's a shortcut for like legitimacy and, and classy, proper theater and all that. Just like everything.
Which Gilligan's Island is going to undermine at every turn on purpose.
So it's just, it's also something that everybody knows about, which gets more and more rare as time goes on. Or knows
something about.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. The people making the show don't know that much about it. But
they probably do, but they're doing this on purpose.
Yeah, I don't know. it's debatable.
You're deriding Sherwood Schwartz. Actually, this is an interesting one. So this episode had two directors. Ida Lupino was the director on this episode. But so she got sick during, while she was directing, like I guess like the week that this was going on. And George Cahan came in and finished the directing. She's an old Hollywood movie star. She was born in like 1918. She was like from the 30s, big Hollywood movie star. Anyway, but so this other guy came in and finished her directing job because she was not well.
Interesting. All right, let's see how it all continues with Happy Days.
Season 2, episode 10, A Star is Bored.
Yeah, this one starts out, again, we talked about it before, that beautiful exterior Arnold's set, all those real cars and everything. And it's the same vibe as the Cheers episode we talked about a while back, where they're all bummed because they just lost the big game, right? It's Richie and Potsy and Ralph, and they're in their baseball uniforms that aren't uniforms.
Yeah, they're in like
t-shirts.
Yeah, they're in like cut up sweatshirts and sweatpants and ball caps. The only thing that's the same that they all have are ball caps.
Yeah. And they're bummed that they lost the baseball game. They always lose. And they start getting on this idea of like, well, the reason we lose is because we don't have uniforms.
Yeah,
right?
Not because we're bad. Yeah. But the other team, they beat us all the time because they have good uniforms.
They look the part.
Yeah.
And so apparently, like, every aspect of this is a little bizarre to me, that you would have some sort of little league or town league or town team or whatever without uniforms at all is strange. And then you find out that their sponsor is the church, right? Yes. So they have to convince the local priest to give them money for baseball uniforms.
Right. And he's like, no way, we don't have any money. Then how did they get involved, right? Because he's saying the only thing we have the money and time for is our annual Shakespeare Festival because Mrs. Stewart, that's what she gives money for every year.
Yeah.
And so
he says like, well, yeah, we have this Mrs. Stewart, this widow. She says, all the money for that stained glass window, this, that, all of that comes from her like endowment.
Right. Like in honor of her husband who passed away a couple years ago.
Right. And all she asks in return is that we do this Shakespeare Festival every year. And so, yeah, it is kind of murky because he sort of says like, well, maybe we could give you new uniforms. Let's talk about it after this fundraiser thing. And then Richie and the guys are like, okay, great. But, last year you only made enough to get us ball caps. Let's make sure we make lots of money this year. Maybe let's do something, cool that's not Shakespeare. And that's when the priest has to explain, now, boys, Mrs. Witherstaff or whatever, she wants it to be Shakespeare.
Stewart, yeah. Just like Witherstaff.
And so they're like, okay, it has to be Shakespeare, fine. Let's think of a way to make this, like, to bring in people, right?
Their motive is so that the house is full.
Yes.
Right, because they only have, I think they said something like, well, last year only the first 2 rows were filled.
Exactly. That's why, essentially, they don't have uniforms, because their sponsor is a church that can't get people to come to their Shakespeare fundraiser.
Right.
So their idea is, let's cast an A-list actor, right? They find out that Tom Bosley,
sense. They could totally just do that, right? Well, they're in like Indiana or something. something.
This conversation spills over to the home where Marion and Mr. C are talking, and Marion, the mom, explains, I don't know how credible this is, but it kind of made sense. She says, oh yeah, I've been to these local charity events, and one time they got Mickey Rooney to show up, and they made a ton of money.
Somebody,
yeah, and it
like
is something I have learned. If you want celebrities to come to your not so highfalutin event or show or whatever, having it be for charity is a way to do that.
Right.
So in broad strokes, I feel like it kind of makes sense. And look, it's not like it works.
Well, so exactly. That's how now they're trying to figure out if they have any connections whatsoever that they can get a celebrity, right? Yeah. And so it turns out that Tom Bosley, the dad, had this sort of passing encounter when he was coming home from World War II, and this other guy was being deployed.
Yes, Monty Miller.
Right. He passed him on the gangplank, like on the gangway.
Yes.
And the guy dropped his canteen. And then Mr. C gives him his canteen, and the guy was like, thank you so much. And he's like, here, take my card. If you ever need anything, just call. And it turns out this guy is like a Hollywood talent agent or producer or something.
Agent. Yeah, so he's like an old war buddy, except not. He's just an old war friend that he met one time. Passed on a train platform. But yeah, they go to see this guy again. Yeah, like you said.
They get an appointment, but for somehow they get the appointment, but his secretary never tells him who these kids are. Right.
Yeah. Although, to be fair, it does kind of make sense. When they get to this talent agent's office, and yeah, if you're incredulous about why would there even be a talent agent in this Milwaukee setting or whatever, but then you learn this is the guy that books the local rodeos. He's the guy that gets people, a clown to perform at your state fair or whatever.
Exactly.
And so, when they're, they go there, there's jokes about try to get Olivier. Of course, Laurence Olivier played Hamlet in the movie. And all the things he's throwing out, this agent guy, are like things to do with cowboys and rodeos. And then he says his big suggestion is, I can get you Alan Funt. Neither of us knew who that was, so we looked it up. He's the creator of Candid Camera. And then he also says Buffalo Bob Smith. And Ralph Mouth is like, you mean Buffalo Bob from Howdy Doody? So you get the impression that, this agent guy has connections in the children's cowboy entertainment world.
Yes.
And then when Richie finally says that they only have $500 as their budget, he says, how did you get in here?
Right. And so, he gives him a card and it all kind of falls apart. And then that's the end of that. So the guys are back at Arnold's and they're like, what are we going to do? And then they have the brilliant idea that if they cast someone popular in the lead role.
Yeah, someone locally popular since they can't have an actual celebrity.
Since they can't have an actual actor or celebrity come and do it, then that would fill the house. And that's all they really need is to fill the house, right? Yeah. Which is the same idea that my high school drama teacher used to have. Uh-huh. She would go and get the basketball and football stars to come be the guys, because you never have enough guys in the shows.
Inspiration for the High School Musical.
That's right, exactly. And so, and Glee as well. Mm-hmm. And and that was that's how you have all these theater girls dating all these popular guys in my high school.
Well, the Happy Days version of that obviously is Fonzie,
That's right.
Nobody's
He's the
more popular
He's the
than
coolest
Fonzie.
guy.
Yeah. So when they float the idea of Fonzie being in this,
he's like, hey, and walks away. He's like, Fonzie doesn't.
I'm too cool for that.
Fonzie doesn't act.
Well, yeah. Richie at first says you could be Clark Gable. He doesn't like that. But then someone else says no, you could be more like Brando. And he's like, okay, now you're
James
talking.
Dean.
Yeah. He quotes On the Waterfront. He says I could have been a contender. So yeah,
and they told him, they were like, Brando was going to do this part, but he had to step away.
And it makes a lot of sense. You look at the iconic image of Brando from On the Waterfront, and that is basically the inspiration for Fonzie. So that's how they sell him on the idea of playing Hamlet, who, sure, on a sort of emotional level, is a kind of James Dean-esque character, lots of angst and antisocial tendencies. Fonzie consults his harem, right? He's got 18 girls.
He's like, hey, girls, and he snaps his fingers and all the girls in the place crowd around him, and he's like, any of you girls want to see me do a play? And they're all like, yeah. And they're like, would you be in it? And they're like, yeah. And he's like, all right, I'll do it.
Yeah. And he says, yeah, only one question. Who's Hamlet?
Right.
Wah, wah, cut to commercial. He doesn't know anything. And then, yeah, we get, I think the next scene is like their sort of like rehearsal, you know, and the aforementioned widow shows up and she's going to play Ophelia,
yes.
which I thought was very bizarre. Like Ophelia's meant to be like a young woman, and this lady is like 65 years old.
Oh, wow.
She's supposed to be the romantic interest for Fonzie.
Yeah, but she's
in the show.
1950s looking like that. So, you know, I just want to let it be known, and this is in the like 1970s, 80s, right? My grandmother at 35 looked like she was 65.
Yeah,
so
that's true. But it was interesting to me how like the show doesn't really make much of that. Like they mention it and then everyone's just kind of like, okay, moving on.
Yeah, well, but you see what ended up happening is that they added a lady, like Ophelia got a lady in waiting, which is
right.
one of Fonzie's main
girls.
squeeze.
Fonzie refuses to wear the traditional clothing.
No, he doesn't
right?
want to wear tights. He's like, what am I, a fairy?
Yeah, and the director / priest says, we're here to do Hamlet, not the blackboard shuffle, right? Objecting to his, you know, leather and blue jeans look. And so the compromise is, all right, I'll wear the cape. You know, I'm not wearing your prissy little tights, but I'll wear the cape. And yeah, it's just funny. I mean, we'll really get more into this in the Head of the Class version. But it's funny how since the 80s, this has really changed, I think, where like, I feel like the legitimate theater world has gotten the memo about the tights. Would you agree? Like if you see a Shakespeare play now, they make a point, even if they don't modernize it, they don't have this weird, cheesy costuming that, you know, was always the assumption that a Shakespeare play would look like at this time. You know what I mean?
Tights and tunics?
Yeah, yeah,
tights.
I feel like
the
now...
Coens, like the recent Macbeth,
Yeah.
they were in tunics and tights.
Yeah, interesting. I feel like I said, I've seen lots of Shakespeare over the years, and it's like sometimes they explicitly modernize it,
right.
and sometimes it's more like, no, we're not changing it in any specific way, but we just know that everyone's tired of the cliche of the leotards and the tights and the frilly stuff, and so we'll still be old-timey, but just not like that. I don't know. It's just something I've noticed where it looks like the Zeffirelli Romeo and Juliet. It looks like that's stereotypical, like you said, tights and tunics.
Yeah.
And Fonzie's not on board.
No, he's not having it.
Yeah, there's another fun scene where back at the homestead, they're giving Fonzie a crash course in Hamlet. Right,
because he is like, he doesn't know a lot. He's not really getting it. When he's sitting there doing his lines, he's like, blah, blah, blah. I mean, we get a moment of him, you know, doing some of the lines, and he's just like droning. And he says to Richie, he's like, why do they talk like this? Like, why don't they speak in like normal English? Yeah. Yeah. The dad at one point says, so you're going to play the melancholy Dane, huh? And he's like, that's it. I'm not playing a dog.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, like I said, we're going to keep getting that melancholy Dane thing. I loved Winkler's delivery when, you know, Richie is explaining to him the whole story, how it goes down. And then, I forget what he wants to happen with Claudius, but Richie tells him like, oh no, eventually you'll kill Claudius. And Fonzie goes, I like that. It was very, very funny. And so, then we get the actual show, you know, the play itself. We get the real dialogue this time. It's not like Gilligan's Island. They're doing the actual Shakespearean dialogue. Yep. And Fonzie is a nightmare, right? He's really bad at first. Nobody likes him. He can't remember his lines. Yeah, he calls for the line immediately. Yeah, he comes in late with his first cue. He menaces the audience, like somebody titters, and he goes like, what are you laughing at? Something funny? Yeah, he's like, nothing's funny up here. Yeah. And, because he's like, if you look out at the audience, it's a bunch of these like greaser guys that look like him. Yeah. Yeah. Some of his friends came but like people that we never see. And then the girls that are like, you know, his little harem. Well, their plan worked. Fonzie brought all these people in seats that wouldn't normally be there for the Church's Shakespeare Festival. Yeah. So we get, just like in all of the community theater episodes we talked about, anytime you have a play within a sitcom episode, you're going to get this little sort of montage, highlight highlight reel, right?
Of the different scenes of them doing the play.
Exactly. So we got a taste of Fonzie being really bad as Hamlet. And then we get, once again, the neither a borrower or a lender be thing where Richie is playing Polonius, right? That's the character who, I guess, he's doing an old guy thing. Like, he's doing it in this really bizarre voice.
He's got a big beard and he's playing it like a little old man.
Yeah, and so I guess the joke is just supposed to be like Richie got really into it in this like bizarre way.
Well, and you can see that kind of like happening throughout, right? Because he's the one that normally he's a little bit jumpy and squirrely and like nervous about things. But in this episode, every time Fonzie like raises this isn't going to work for me, Richie is very cool, calm, and collected, and is like, no, look, this is how it will work. And it's not, he doesn't have any of that like normal nervous energy that like I recognize as being a Richie Cunningham sort of thing. And so, I think that he is into this. I think that this is like, he's super into it and like really likes this play and like Shakespeare. And so we have this moment backstage that's supposed to be like, I mean, this is going to be one of these like very special episodes. We're talking about 1974, I think this airs. Fonzie's like about to walk out. He's not having it. He's over it. And he's like, what is this? What is this language? Why are we talking like this? What does this stuff even mean? Yeah. When Richie's like, it's old English. And he's like, why don't they speak new English? I can't even understand it. What is this to be or not to be? Like nobody even knows what that is. And then Richie explains he's contemplating suicide. And we get this like kind of slow zoom, quiet moment. And Fonzie's like, well, but he's got his dad around. So like why? And Richie's like, but his dad's dead. He's a ghost. And he's like, yeah, but a see-through dad's better than no dad at all. My dad left me when I was 12. I've definitely contemplated suicide.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was like, woo, we just took a turn.
Yes, he does not say explicitly, I definitely contemplated suicide.
No, he says I've definitely thought about being or not being.
What he says is, he goes, Richie, do you think that most people think about this to be or not to be stuff? And Richie says, yeah, I don't know, Fonz. And it is, I took note of that phrasing because that was really kind of masterful in my opinion, really well done. And he, like you said, he relates to Hamlet's daddy issues. He says, hey, look, see-through dad's better than no dad. And it clicks, And so when he goes out for the second half of the show, you get another major subtrope of Shakespeare stuff, which is the cool guy explaining Shakespeare, paraphrasing it in a hip way, going, you don't understand. When Hamlet's saying to be and not to be, he's wondering if he's going to kick his own bucket. He's wondering if he's going to take the big dive. You dig what I'm saying?
Right. And he starts to do the speech and he sees that people are yawning and then he like stands up and tells everybody what it's all about and then, goes back into it. But mostly it's just him paraphrasing it all. Yes. And and then we get the fight scene at the end and he snaps his fingers again and he takes off the cape and somebody brings him his leather jacket and he's like, the director's like, what are you doing? The priest is like, what are you doing? And he's like, I always rumble in this. Yeah. And then he pulls out the sword and they have the fight at the end. It's, it was fun.
I do kind of object to this messaging. Like you see, even the parents, right? Mr. and Mrs. Cunningham are dozing off in the...
Mr. C is, Marion isn't. Yeah.
In the to be or not to be speech as written. And then they're intrigued when Fonzie starts paraphrasing it. I don't like this idea that you're going to lose people. If you do it the real way. You have to and of course, head of the class is going to get into that a little bit too. But it's like you need Fonzie to kind of explain it in these modern hip terms.
But I mean, that definitely is a point that people get to, I think, as they're discovering Shakespeare, right? Is that you get to a point where you're like, okay, so the only way I can get this to be relatable is to set it in a different time period or do it in this different way or reimagine it as this. And like you were saying in the 90s, we definitely had 90s, early aughts, we had a moment where there was a lot of that. But I agree with you. I don't think it has to be done in that way in order for it to be understood. But it is a hook that's going to get butts in the seats, though.
Yes. And frankly, yes, Arthur Fonzarelli That's the only way he's going to be able to deal with it. Like, if for no other reason than he has not memorized the actual speech. And then we're back at the ball game again. You know, the play goes well. Fonzie says, oh, this acting jazz is all right, but I think I'm going to stick with engines, right? We need to reset the status quo. It's that kind of sitcom. And then, you know, we're back at Arnold's and, you know, they're
it's like the next day, they are a couple, you know, weeks later or whatever, they got their uniforms.
Yeah, but we get another quote because somebody says, all the world's a stage and we are merely players, right? So we're just sticking in one last Hamlet reference before it ends. But yeah, look, I think we can say this one was much more educated about what Hamlet is, you know, and it rewarded some knowledge about it.
But still not.
I think it was.
Yes, it was more than Gilligan's Island, but still not like truly understanding all the bits.
Yeah, well, no, definitely not all of the bits, but like we said, that moment where Richie and Fonzie are talking about the to be or not to be speech. Okay. Simplistic, of course, but seeing, you know, Fonzie's face change as he's contemplating, gee, this guy, he's not sure if he wants to live because of the issues he has with his dad. Like, that is the reason why people have been reading Hamlet for hundreds of years. And so in that sense, I think it did a good job.
In that one very narrow sense.
Moving on to Head of the Class.
Season 1, Episode 8, Critical Choices.
Yep, Head of the Class was huge for me as a kid. This was probably the first sitcom I ever really got into. We've talked about it a handful of times, including on our first episode ever when Arvid considered losing his virginity. So, of course, Mr. Moore is a out-of-work actor.
Oh, yeah, and we are like mid-season 1. We're peak Howard Hessman with a frickin' rat tail.
Yeah, well, he keeps one version or another of that rat tail through most of the series.
Gross.
But yeah, because we're still in season 1, it means we still have Jawar Halal, we still have Janet, or Janice rather.
Yep.
There are a handful of characters that would get swapped out every season, and all of these kids, despite being extremely intelligent, went to high school for 6 or 7 years. But because he is an out-of-work actor, once in a while, once or twice per season, we would get these storylines that are not about, you know, one or another of the students and their issues, but are about Mr. Moore and his pursuits.
Right,
you know?
What he's doing outside of work.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is one I was surprised at the beginning. You know, he comes in with his skull. He's late to work because he had to pick up his skull from the prop shop or whatever. And he is not trying to keep his worlds separate. You know, there's other Head of the Class episodes where it's like he got a job as a silly commercial guy and he doesn't want the kids to find out about it or something. And we've even talked about how, you know, you don't always broadcast your theater stuff to the work people because it's just like kind of keep it. So I was kind of surprised when he was so, you know, sort of gleefully sharing with the class. Oh yeah, I'm doing this hip new version of Hamlet and I want you guys to all see it.
Well, and I mean, but you see with the way his boss deals with him, you know,
Dr. Samuels.
I mean, he doesn't like him in the first place, but he, you know, he's talking about, oh, nice of you to show up here to your side gig. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, and that's why, like, that's one of the reasons I keep it quiet. You know, it's not an actual pursuit for me that's going to ever be a career. That's not why I do it. I do it as a hobby because I love it. I got burned on my first job. Because of that. People, you know, my boss was like, oh, are you just like not really here because you want to be an actor? And I'm like, no, but ever since then, you keep it secret. Well, but
not Mr. Moore.
Not Mr. Moore. He wants the kids' feedback. He really trusts them as like the new and upcoming young eyes, fresh generation. Come watch this and see if it makes any sense. And so, but he asks them, hey, you know, because he's still kind of new being their teacher. They had a different teacher previous years. So he's like, hey, do you guys, you know, have any familiarity with Hamlet? And of course, then they all list their credentials.
Yes. Each one has their own custom-made angle on Hamlet. Simone is like, oh, I did a study of all of the botanical references. And Arvid is like, Janice and I did a computerized breakdown of all, you know, like they've all applied their specific nerd variety to Hamlet in one way or another at some point.
Yeah. And so he's like, well, great, then you know it. And so I want real feedback. I don't want any of that like normal after show lobby talk that's like, wow, what an interesting, evening or whatever kind of stuff. He's like, I really want your real feedback. And it's established right then and there. Jawar Halal, he likes to agree with everybody.
Oh, yeah. And we need to talk about this because this is a very rare artifact indeed, a Jawar Halal-centered head of the class episode. Like I mentioned before, he was one of the ones that got the axe at the end of the first season. And yeah, he is just a little bit of a boring character. We've talked about it before. This show is very fun in its format. You already have to buy into that the size of the class is so small. And the truth is, even the amount of kids that they have are too much. And the show does a pretty good job of making the most out of all of them. But it's like inevitably, like the little sister on a family sitcom, like some of these characters just didn't really hit.
Yeah.
And Jawar Halal was one of them. But in this episode, he gets lots of action. He's sort of presented as a sycophant, and he like agrees with everything that Mr. Moore says.
And not just him, like people in the class, when two sides, opposing sides of an argument come up, whoever spoke last, he'll be like, oh, that's a really good point. I think I agree. And then the next person will be like, oh, but I think da da da. And he's like, actually, I agree with you. And so they call him the flip-flopper.
Yeah. We get a bit of a cringy impression from Dennis, played by Dan Schneider.
Yes.
Only bad thing he ever did was...
We get several cringy moments, given what we know now, from Dennis, played by Dan Schneider.
But it requires no extrinsic knowledge to be a little annoyed by his Indian
by him doing an
imitation.
Indian accent. Yeah.
But in any case, we're going to set up that Jawar Halal. Yeah, they all get annoyed with him. Like, we're not going to listen to you because you don't have your own opinions. You just kind of agree with everybody. It also is established that the class as a whole does not like information that threatens their worldview. When Mr. Moore suggests that, what if Shakespeare didn't write his plays? There are some people that think that the Earl of Canterbury or whatever wrote them.
Earl of Oxford.
Yeah. And they're all like, whoa, Mr. Moore, you're freaking us out. We don't like this.
Hold on. And then they all get a bunch of books out and start flipping through them. And they're looking for, the facts. What is this question? Where is this coming from? Where's the research on it?
Yeah, they say specifically, don't make us nervous. And it's the overall arc of Head of the Class, of course, in general, that Mr. Moore is going to help them come out of their shells and not be so rigid. But we're establishing before we even get to the play part that these are all kids that are very bright, but they're kind of shielded and they have this sort of fragile worldview that they don't like things that disorient them or surprise them.
Exactly. They like learning. They like facts. They like research. They don't like, questions like this that are kind of unknowable.
Yeah, they like facts. That's what the academic stuff is all about. And so they go to this show I love the detail that his play is in Newark. I thought that was a very appropriate thing.
Yes.
A lazier show would just be, it's in some crappy theater in the city. But
it's
no,
downtown.
It's in Newark.
And I thought it was, but then later on they just kept saying, the toast of Newark or the bane of Newark.
And this, I really enjoyed this episode, and I really related to this whole concept where Mr. Moore, he gets up in front of them, they've arrived at this little theater, and they're talking amongst themselves, they're complaining about how crappy the seats are and stuff. Simone says, this isn't Cats, they've dispensed with the frivolities of commercial theater, And so Mr. Moore comes up and he says very straightforward, he says, I'm a little uncomfortable here. I'm a little nervous. You guys are my students. This is a weird dynamic. But he says, you mentioned it earlier. He says, I don't want to hear it was interesting or, hey, what can I say? Or any of these catchphrases. I want your real
any
feedback.
Of the platitudes that you get when people are trying not to say mean things.
Yes, and he gives them these little cards to fill out. And this is something I related to so thoroughly. We've been going to film festivals all year, where I watch my film with people and, random strangers are very, very kind. But, I notice how there's certain friends of mine, especially the sort of brainy ones, like the characters in this, that like, that they will do that. Like they will do this sort of
dissonance of like, I want to sit down and have a whole deep conversation about this, but this isn't the moment for it. So what do I say?
Yes. And sometimes they just straight up don't like it for whatever reason. Right. It's not for them, like these characters. And so what Mr. Moore is trying to avoid is this very real phenomenon where people are like, wow, yeah, that was something. Yeah, you guys really did it.
I can't imagine anyone not liking your movie. It's fabulous.
But so, yeah, this was something I just related to this whole dynamic. And then the show starts. And this was so interesting to me vis-a-vis all the stuff we were talking about at the beginning, the 90s trend of modernizing Shakespeare. This is a little before that. Yes, this is like mid-80s. And so, of course, this has been done, but it was not de rigueur at this time. It was not the norm to update your Shakespeare production.
Well, at least
some
in
other
things that
setting.
were like big, right? But I think that this definitely was something that was already happening underground.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, exactly. But it is the way that this whole story is characterized, which is that the students in Mr. Moore's class are absolutely scandalized by his modern updating. I feel like if this were being made 5 years later, say, you couldn't do this. Like this would not be a controversial notion. Right. You know, what we're talking about is Mr. Moore has modernized Hamlet, not modernized the language. He's done what most shows do. You keep the language and everything the same, but he's not only updated it to this modern New York setting with Motel Elsinore, neon signs, and having everybody dressed like that. He's also added these avant-garde elements, like the mirror, the bathroom mirror.
Video
with
production
the,
is
it's a bathroom mirror that with the text to be or not to be on it.
Like written in lipstick.
Yes. And then when he opens the mirror, it's like a bathroom cupboard thing. He opens it and there's a video screen inside of this same young actor that's playing Hamlet. And so they're both doing the soliloquy at the same time.
Yes,
like it's just
like
all weird.
It's this sort of like echo chamber of the to be or not to be soliloquy. And it's really interesting. The parts that double up, like he's hearing them back in his mind as he's thinking it. And it's like, then the video gets ahead of him. Mm-hmm. So it's like what's in his head as he's speaking. I mean, you're hearing from me, like right in this moment, how much I thought that was interesting. The kids hated it.
Yes. We cut to the kids. They're all scribbling furiously on their little note cards.
Like their faces are aghast. They're like, what is happening?
Yes. We do get,
except for Jawar Halal, who's like, this is fabulous. He's got a big smile on his face.
Yes, Jawar Halal loves it. We get thee to a nunnery somewhere in the montage, just tracking all the quotes.
Well, no, he says it. So Ophelia, we only get a shot of her for a second, but she's a prostitute in this hotel, and he hands her a bill and like tucks it in her boobs and is like, get thee to a nunnery. And she picks it out of her boobs and kind of looks at it, kind of gives it a dirty look because it wasn't enough or something. And that's all we get of Ophelia.
Yeah, but it is, again, it's just so funny to me. This whole look, Ophelia is going to be a sex worker off the street, and this one's going to be whatever, a crooked cop, and we're going to have neon signs. And it's like, yeah, I feel like just a handful of years later, like, the criticism would be, this is trite. This is
everybody
lame.
does this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is right out of the playbook of every Shakespeare modernization.
Exactly. And so when I did Hamlet, we did a punk Hamlet. Like that was, right? So it was, everybody was in the, kind of like, safety pins and plaid and black leather and that kind of stuff. It was punk, except for the player, like the players that come to do the thing. They were in traditional, like you're saying, like tunics and tights dress. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, the question and the big conversation we all had around that was, do we need to do this? Hasn't this been done? Like, haven't we reset all of these shows so many times that we don't need to do this anymore? But again, I thought this one worked. I liked it.
Yeah,
I thought Mr. Moore's worked. I mean, I would like to have seen more of it because obviously there were parts that were kind of like, well, a little too like, what's happening?
Some of it's a little cheesy, but again, it's the 80s. This totally seems like absolutely par for the course for some weird off-Broadway version of this.
Off Newark Broadway.
Yeah, no, but that's what I'm saying is that I honestly think something like this, of course it's the sitcom version of this, but something like this probably did exist.
Of course it did.
In the village
many things
somewhere.
existed like this.
So yeah, we pick up with it. We come back in the next morning and Mr. Moore's like, all right, I got all your note cards. Haven't read them yet, but I have them. I look forward to
he asked
discussing
them
it.
to do them anonymously and leave them in his teacher mailbox. And so he has all of these like various color papers, different sizes. They were all using different like scrap pieces of paper or whatever. And so he's like, can't wait to read them, but I'm going to read them at lunchtime. Let's get on to, today we're talking about the TVA and the WPA. And the New Deal. So let's go.
One of the recurring hallmarks of Head of the Class is Mr. Moore always gets like one or two sentences into his history lesson, whatever happens with the story that we're actually following. And in this case, it's him interrupting himself because he's just like, you know what? I got to know. I got to see at least one or two of these cards.
And they're like,
of course, something I relate
don't. It's okay. Just read it at lunch. It's fine. We're really interested in the TVA. Tell us more.
Yeah, which is funny that all of these student characters were like, they hated it so much that they couldn't just write a platitude or like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like they couldn't just lie.
They weren't going to lie because they were asked not to lie and they respect him very much. And so they don't want to hurt his feelings. But it's supposed to be anonymous, but it's too cringy. They don't want to be there when he reads them.
Yeah. And so he starts reading one of them and they're all pans, basically.
Well, the first one is, it was so great. You should be so proud.
Oh, right. Because that's Jawar Halal, of course. So Jawar Halal, he wrote something nice. And of course, they're like, they dismiss it. And then Darlene uses the phrase B-movie claptrap in her note. They're all saying different variations on like, how dare you? You know, even Dennis, the iconoclast, is like, video belongs in the den. You don't put a video screen on a stage for live actors. Like, again, it's just so funny to me that even in 1986, just like, seriously, like this is such a like theater 1.0 mindset. Again, that's why they made a point to establish that they're so, fearful of any outside
right, that they
knowledge.
Are very in the box, even though they're highly intelligent.
Exactly. This was before I feel like we started using that cliche of thinking outside the box, but these kids do not like to do that. And so, it's like one after another, their note cards are all horrible. He starts kind of getting into it with them. Again, something I really relate to. You want that honest criticism or that honest feedback, and then you want to engage with it. And what you have often is just legitimate differences of opinion.
Right.
And so you have the thing of like, well, I was intentionally doing that. I wanted to do that. I wanted to have that effect or whatever. And it is...
Yeah, instead of being poisoned by by wine in a goblet, right? The mother character is poisoned by shrimp Louis.
Yes.
Food poisoning. And so there was an argument being made that undermines this idea of the goblet and the wine and the wealth and all that. And so, why would you do it with like this, shrimp Louis at a diner? That doesn't make any sense. It's not as, whatever. They didn't get that into it, but that was the point. And so he's got on the board, he starts writing on the board the specific criticisms so he can start, he's like, all right, let's workshop this. I've got a week of rehearsals before we open. I want to start making some changes. I want to hear your notes. That's why I asked you guys to come. So he's got on the board video and shrimp Louis.
He also, I love this. They mentioned that in his version, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern were film critics Siskel and Ebert.
Yes.
Which I like. I've been thinking about that ever since. I want that I want to build a new Hamlet around that concept.
That idea.
Siskel and Ebert are Rosencrantz and Guildenstern.
Well, and then their criticism of that was we couldn't even tell which one was which.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, that's all in the costuming.
Yeah. Alan says you don't tamper with tradition. Yeah. So exactly. Mr. Moore is like, okay, let's do a page 1 rewrite, scene 1, act 1. And, the scene kind of trails off, goes to commercial or whatever. But I, in my mind, are thinking this is a terrible idea.
Yeah.
Like, don't do this, Mr. Moore.
Don't rewrite
take
it.
your high school classes notes indiscriminately and redo your whole show a week before.
No, I know. I was
thing.
a little bit nervous that this was going to turn around and be one of these, like, you guys really helped me schmaltzy kind of endings. I was like, oh no, I don't know that this is the way direction we should go here.
Yeah, but it does sort of play with your expectations. So we don't get to see the actual show as it happens. We have them, just like everything with Head of the Class, very, very rarely leaves the classroom. I'm glad we got to see the show even the first time.
Yeah.
And so they come back on Monday morning and Mr. Moore has reviews. He has a handful of reviews and he takes out one to read and it's a bad review.
Yes.
The review starts panning it and all of the kids are like, oh, geez, maybe.
There's something rotten in the city of Newark is what the review said.
Yeah, so we get another reference to that. And then all of the kids are like, shit, did we give Mr. Moore bad advice?
And
Was his video thing good?
Well, no, but they're all like second guessing themselves and they're like, oh no. And then they start blaming each other.
Right.
It's like that moment.
I didn't tell him to get rid of the prostitute.
Why did you mention that? What? But I didn't mean this. I just said this. It's like that moment in Into the Woods where it's like, no, it's your fault.
Yeah. And so Mr. Moore eventually reveals, a couple things. He didn't actually change his play. I guess, I don't know if this was just an exercise, having them, break down all the notes, or maybe he thought
about
better of it.
Yeah, but I think he said, no, you know what? It took, and he explains that to them. He's like, it took me so many years to build up the courage to even mount this production, to put myself in this role of a director that is like uncomfortable and new, to do all of these ideas that I had that, yes, are different, but that I just feel like I want to see realized. And that courage, and this is my opportunity to honor the courage that I had in starting in the process in the first place. And so if it's going to be bad, it's going to be bad, but it's going to be my bad.
Yeah. And also Jawar Halal finally reveals, he gets his moment to shine where he's like, I said that I liked the show, and you guys, because we didn't mention that in the earlier scene where all of the kids are criticizing it in the classroom, when Jawar Halal goes to speak up, they're literally like, shut up, Jawar Halal. You don't, your opinions are worthless. You never stick to anything. Get out of here.
Right.
So now Jawar Halal is like, no, let me explain why I liked the show. And it's a nice character moment, but it's sort of the same crap that we got from Happy Days, which is like Mr. Moore's modernization helped me understand,
in
he's
the
like,
to be or not to be speech specifically.
And it's a little, after
because
all
Hamlet is me. He's a flip-flopper. He's trying to figure out which way he wants to
make up his mind, which is good, but it's just that same thing of reading this, incredible text and seeing it performed by amazing actors, that's never been enough. I needed Mr. Moore to have it take place in Hell's Kitchen for me to understand,
In Hotel Elsinore.
Yes, now I get it. So that part is a little goofy, but it is a nice moment where Jawar Halal was like, no, that is a legitimate opinion that I had that you guys should have listened to.
Dismissed. And then the rest of the class is like, wait, Jawar Halal didn't change his mind this time. He held on to his opinion. Yeah. And he's like, yeah, and here's why. So he gets his kind of turnaround, yay, good for him, his moment. And then Mr. Moore reveals that he didn't actually change anything. And then he pulls out the stack of other reviews and they're sort of middling to good.
Some are good. He reads a few little choice phrases. He says things like, oh, it was occasionally brilliant or something and what he's showing them is you see what I did. I put myself out on a limb and I made an interesting, divisive piece of art. Some people hated it. Some people liked it. Some people thought it was kind of interesting, but didn't know what to make of it. And I consider that a success. And again, it's just something I really related to, that, you know, you work on something, you make decisions of like, gee, if I do this, this will be interesting. But I know that some people won't like that or won't understand that, you know, or having a conversation with somebody where they go, you know, I didn't really get that. And you have the thought of like, gee, should I have made that more clear? And, you know, and so he's sort of teaching them that these complexities are what art and theater are about.
Yeah,
you know?
It's to make us think. It's sometimes it's purposefully confounding.
Yeah, exactly. In terms of tracking the trope, I feel like we got fewer quotes, but again...
Yeah, but more actual, like we got more real dialogue, though.
Yeah, that's true. And we got, I'd say, in this one, it's almost like, you know, the to be or not to be thing and Hamlet's general indecision, that does relate to Jawar Halal. Otherwise, I feel like the story of Hamlet is a little bit beside the point.
Yeah.
You know, like he could have been staging Macbeth or Winter's Tale or whatever.
Yeah, no, this is about making risky choices.
Exactly.
Taking
and Hamlet,
risks, being courageous.
Yeah, and Hamlet just sort of being, especially in the 80s, being one of the 2 Shakespeare plays that you're always going to go to.
Right.
All right, let's finish it up with Frasier.
Season 8, episode 12, The Show Must Go Off.
Yeah, the thought that I had during this, watching Frasier and Niles standing next to each other, watching this Shakespeare thing, was if there could have been a production of Julius Caesar with Kelsey Grammer as Brutus and David Hyde Pierce as Cassius or something along those lines. Oh, that would have been incredible. Yeah. These 2 guys.
Like amazing. I mean, you know my feelings on John Mahoney. I think he is an amazing actor. Like, I think I love David Hyde Pierce. I think he's friggin' hilarious. John Mahoney can do drama and comedy and music and everything. He's amazing. And then you've got Derek Jacobi, who won an Emmy for for the show as a guest star. Yeah,
this is going to take a different sort of angle on this. That's really fun. So it starts at a Star Trek convention, and we have this actor Derek. I've heard it said Jacobi and Jacobi.
Is it a Star Trek? I thought it was just sci-fi in general.
Okay, sci-fi. Yeah, a lot of Trek people there, but he's from this other show, a fictional show called Space Control. That's, you know, sort of meant to be like a Star Trek, Battlestar Galactica kind of thing. Derek Jacobi, I think, is great casting for this. I feel like he's meant to be this sort of actor, and this is kind of prescient because I think, when did this come out? Do you know?
This was 2001.
At this point, we've long since had Patrick Stewart on Star Trek The Next Generation.
Oh yeah, this is 100% his story.
Right, and now we're getting into the days of having Patrick Stewart also, as well as Ian McKellen in the X-Men, and then Ian McKellen in the Lord of the Rings.
And Kelsey Grammer eventually did X-Men.
That's true. Yeah, he wasn't as beloved, though. He was in the one that people don't like as much. But yeah, that thing of taking these really classy, older British actors, and someone figured out, specifically with Shakespeare and classical theater, if those guys can make that work, if they can hold people's attention and give a credible performance doing this Shakespeare stuff, that's basically the same skill as being Gandalf and Magneto and all that other stuff. Yeah. And Derek Jacobi is absolutely that kind of actor, and he's in the Kenneth Branagh version of Hamlet, but he was never in a Harry Potter movie. Yes. He was never in a major superhero movie. Like, he didn't get that late era thing that a lot of those other guys did. So it's kind of fun to see him playing this fictionalized version of that same thing.
Right. No, very true. So why did they end up at that convention in the first place? It was Frasier and Roz. And I think Roz was there for some reason.
Yeah, I honestly didn't.
She needed to get an autograph, or she needed to get something. And Frasier's just with her, and he turns around and he sees,
Jackson Headley.
Jackson Headley, yes. And he sees him, and he's like, immediately like, what is he doing here?
Yes, he's at an autograph booth signing autographs, which is what you do with what these guys do at conventions. Yeah.
So he's beside himself, and he explains to, us and Roz that he and Niles, when they were 12 years old, saw this man perform Hamlet, and he is Hamlet to them.
Yes,
and
opened their eyes to Shakespeare.
And then they, loved him and would watch whatever productions of him doing Shakespeare that they could get their hands on when they were kids on VHS or whatever. And they just loved him. They loved him so much. They love Shakespeare today because of this man.
Yeah.
He gets in the line to
first he
shake his hand.
He asks some random guy, sort of like guy that looks like comic book guy from The Simpsons. He says, "Why
this guy was in the Oregon Shakespeare Festival for 15 years. That guy, he was funny. He's a local kind of Oregon actor maybe not, maybe he's big, but that's his story."
Yeah, but he asks him why is Sir Jackson Headley, signing autographs at this random place? He's
they're like, Tobor?
Yeah, he's like,
he's amazing.
That's Tobor the android, from Space Control. And so, Frasier goes up to him. He's like, "No, I don't need your autograph. I got your autograph 40 years ago. I worship you." He says everything you already explained. My brother and I see every performance. And Headley, this actor played by Derek Jacobi is really touched by that. And he's like, "Oh, that's so nice." And then they kind of leave it. And then we pick up with Frasier and Niles, waxing nostalgic back home about this actor that they love.
Right. And Niles is super jealous that Frasier got to see him and shake his hand and tell him that. And Niles goes and finds the autograph that they got, which was on the back of an excuse note from Get Out of PE note.
It's a non-Hamlet quote, I noticed, because he says, "My kingdom for more fans like you." That was the little note he wrote, but that's a Richard III thing.
There's a lot of not Hamlet quotes in this. There's quotes from King Lear and Twelfth Night, all sorts of them. And they went deep with the quotes that weren't from Hamlet on this.
Because I guess, like we said, you were supposed to understand Hamlet was his main thing, but they saw him do all kinds of shows.
Well, but also because this is, Frasier and Niles, and they talk like this anyway. Exactly. So they're just throwing, because Shakespeare's on their mind, they're throwing these into their everyday conversation even more. I
have to say, where this story goes is pretty much as sitcom-y and silly as the Gilligan's Island story. They decide, the two of them, Frasier and Niles, it's that thing of them escalating each other and revving each other up. They're we need, how tragic that this guy is toiling in these stupid science fiction shows, and they're like, what if there was a show? What if he could do his one-man show again? Well, how hard is it to rent a theater? This city's full of theaters, and they don't say it, but you've got Newark also. And then they're like, yes, we can save his career. Thank God
they're in
we
Seattle,
came along.
so they're not near to Newark. But yes,
I assume they were in the city. But you're right. They're in. I forgot that they were in Seattle. But yeah, and so it ends with Frasier and Niles just giddy that they have come up with this idea to rent a theater. Yes, be producers. And it really was a shock to me when the next scene is them on a stage, the show isn't happening. They're checking out a stage, getting ready to mount this production.
Yeah.
And they're selling tickets already. They've got they just skip ahead to the show is happening. Everything's been booked.
I got the impression that this was taking place over a month, not like it was the next day or
No,
or
I
quickly.
think that part might have been, but once that next scene starts, I thought that they were a week or so away from opening, even though they haven't seen him act yet.
No, because Jackson Headley says as he comes in and grabs the curtain and starts being like, "Oh, Horatio," and doing all this crazy over the top acting, to the point where every time he takes a pause in his lines, he goes like this, and this crazy inhale breath.
That is the turn of this story, is that when Jacoby shows up to this theater and, "Oh my God, thank you guys so much. I'm looking forward to this.
I can't wait to get started," which is what made me think it's not as far along as you were thinking.
And then when he starts doing it, he starts acting, he's almost, he's like the way someone on a guitar would just start noodling. He's like, oh, here I am. Let me just start doing some of the verses. And yeah, it's hammy and ridiculous, and he does these crazy inhalations,
and he's like gasping with these big breaths.
And so Frasier and Niles
are like, oh no.
Yeah.
So then they go home and they somehow get their hands on a recording of some production that he did, like a King Lear or like a Henry, one of the Henrys or something years and years ago. And so they're watching it. And he's doing that same breathing thing. It's awful. And they have this realization, which for me, this was like, wow, this is this show imitating our show over and over and over again.
What do you mean?
Because they realized that this thing that they liked when they were 12 years old, that like introduced them to what they thought was, the world of Shakespeare and everything. And this guy was so brilliant.
Yeah.
They didn't know it was like, it was bad, but they didn't know it was bad because they didn't know any better, which has definitely happened to us so many times on this show. We're like, oh man, I loved that show. And then we go back and watch it and we're like, ooh.
Yeah. Yeah. Frasier says the man has no instincts, just stinks.
Just stinks.
Right?
That's right.
Interesting wordplay. But so, yeah, Jacoby comes over and they're like, all right, we're going to have to we're just going to have to cancel the show. We're going to have to tell it like it is and tell him that
you tell him the director dropped out, so we're going to have to cancel.
Yeah, but then he cuts that off at the pass, I feel like.
Because he fires the director.
Yeah, and so Frasier ends up going like, all right, Mr. Headley, you deserve honesty, so I'm just going to level with you. And he goes, this rehearsal time is far too short to reach Parnassus, home of the muses. And then Niles goes, forgive us for being so straightforward. and
he's like, oh, I have never worked with producers that didn't try to wimp out at the last minute.
Yeah.
And they exchange a look like, yeah, we know that feeling. We know why.
He does that sitcom thing of just like, oh, no, I'm not hearing it. And just like won't really absorb what they're saying. And it's just like, I can't wait. And just leaves without letting them like do anything.
Yeah.
But in any case, they skip ahead to the sold out show. It's the night of the show. And Frasier and Niles are still like, what do we do? This guy sucks. Everyone we know is here. Everyone he knows is here. They start having this idea of like, maybe we've exceeded maximum occupancy. Why don't we call the fire marshal and maybe he'll shut us down? They get this idea about Jackson. He says his dad's coming and his dad's his good luck charm. Maybe if we divert his dad, they're just kind of like all these different things that they're trying to get him to not go on.
And there's a little bit of like a Frasier, like for fans of Frasier, because we're deep in the series, right? This is like season 8 of Frasier. So there's a little bit of like Easter egg for Frasier fans. If you watch Frasier religiously, you know that Frasier and Niles are big fans of this show, of the old Avengers from the 1960s.
Yeah, Diana Rigg.
Yeah. And even like go so far in one episode to talk about how they idolize this character of Steed.
John Steed.
And they would dress up like him all the time. Well, so the actor playing Jackson Headley's father is Steed, is the guy who played Steed way back in the day.
Yep. He looked familiar to me. That's funny. And so they try all these ideas, like they do implement them. They send the dad to the wrong theater and they call the fire marshal, but it's like nothing works. The fire marshal is a fan.
He's happy, right? So we find out that Jackson Headley's happy that his dad isn't actually there. He doesn't have to hold himself back now that he knows his dad isn't going to be nitpicking every little thing. He can really let it. Yeah. He can go even more over the top than he's been. And of course, they're freaking out.
We learned that his dad was only his good luck charm in the sense that he tells his dad, oh, hey, you're my good luck charm.
My good luck charm. And so the fire marshal isn't going to make it because there's a 5-alarm fire across town. So Frasier gets up on a ladder and tries to set off the sprinklers, but the sprinkler only comes on while the flame is licking it and then immediately turns off again.
Eventually the fire marshal does come, but he's such a fan of Tobar that he's like, I don't care. Like, I'll sit in the aisle.
Yeah, I'll sit in the aisle. I don't care. And he's like, but we're sold out. We're over capacity. And he's like, I love this guy. I can't wait to
Doesn't
see
matter.
him.
Yeah.
And so he's like, oh, thank you so much. And then the dad walks back in and he's like, oh, great, you're here. I've got to go on. And he walks through the puddle from the sprinkler that was on for just a moment, slips, falls, hurts his back. And they're like joyous. They're like, yes, we can go out and cancel the show. Frasier goes out to give a little curtain speech saying, I know you came to see this, and is about to say, I'm so sorry.
Can we just say, just before we wrap up the story, I found this so stressful. Like this whole
it was very
storyline,
farcical there at
it
the
is
end.
farcical,
I enjoyed
but
it.
and it's one of those things you're not supposed to take seriously, but this notion, this whole story about trying to protect this guy from embarrassing himself, and this whole thing of like we have to cancel the show, and I want to go out and tell everybody to go home, and the show's not going to happen. And maybe it is because we're in the midst of going to these film festivals and stuff, and I get nervous about, these events. I found this whole thing, all of this sort of backstage preparations, and like they're trying to have the show get canceled.
Yeah.
I found this whole thing stressful.
Well, that's so funny because I did not. I was enjoying the farcical
you took it how
element
it's
of it.
supposed to be.
Yeah, I was just having a good time with it. And I thought less that they were trying to cancel it so that he wouldn't be embarrassed. I thought they were trying to save their own face.
Well, they say it's both.
Saying that, exactly, that they were sponsoring this drivel. That
it's going to be
awful.
a disaster for everyone.
For everybody involved. And so he goes out, and as he's giving this curtain speech and about to say, so I'm sorry that, the show's going to be canceled, unfortunately, before he can get the words, I'm sorry out, you see Derek Jacobi army crawling with a strained back
dragging
on the
himself,
stage, like a dead leg, and
or like
crawling
James
on his
Caan
arm.
at the end of Misery, trying to get away. Yeah.
And he hauls himself up into the throne that's there, and he's leaning over the side. He's got his legs sticking out. His medallion is askew.
Yeah.
He's sweating profusely.
Yeah. Now he's more like Richard III, like the weird hunchback
exactly.
thing.
So I guess he's like, the show must go on. He's got to go on no matter what. And Kelsey Grammer's just like, so here it is. And he walks off stage, and that's it.
Yeah, we get that great sitcom type ending where Jacoby launches into his hammy, weird soliloquy, and it fades out. And it's one of those endings I'm starting to realize more and more. It's what we talk about with the shows for adults, like Mary Tyler Moore and Perfect Strangers, where it can have these endings that are, it's not like it's, black-hearted and nihilistic or anything, but it's like
they don't have to be a happy ending.
Yeah, it doesn't they don't need to resolve anything. They don't need to learn anything. Like this whole thing that they were trying to avoid, the whole episode that he went on stage and embarrassed everyone, ends up happening.
Yep.
And they just, same thing like, Big Bang Theory, when Sheldon gets up, he wins the award and he gets drunk and he makes a fool of himself. And it's like, because you don't need to have the Miller Boyette thing of like, okay, what did we learn from this? Let's make sure no one's feelings get hurt. You can have it just end like that, where with it's a little more of a sort of existential note, or like, yep, I guess they did all make a fool of themselves. And it's fun. And you don't, and just in terms of pacing, you can then spend the whole episode on the fun part, and you don't have to allot the last 4 minutes for this dumb wrap up where
or
everyone
10
learns.
minutes. Yeah, exactly. No, you're exactly right. And then there's a fun little button where they're backstage and they're kind of whisper talking. You can't hear them. It's just the music, toss salad and scrambled eggs is going over it. And he's leaning over talking to Niles, and Niles is like, what? And pulls out earplugs because he's not trying to listen to the show. And then he leans over and talks to the stage manager, and the stage manager does the same thing. Everybody has in earplugs because it's just so long and annoying that they don't want to hear it.
Yeah. And this one, we should say, is the least to do with Hamlet, right? It falls into our category because he's usually reciting Hamlet. That's the thing that he's going to do for his one-man show, but they really don't get into at all the themes of the play or anything. This isn't one that's going to use that as a metaphor, even though we do get, a few of the quotes like we mentioned. But so, I don't know, looking back over these, this was very fun to me. I really liked this lineup. What do you think? MVPs? Any overarching notions?
This time you're going first. I always tell you who my MVPs are first, and I think I'm going to surprise you. So you go ahead.
Okay. Well, look, again, all very, very fun in their own ways. And, you know, the Happy Days one with Fonzie doing the Hamlet and everything, definitely, you know, like a sitcom study sort of iconic moment. But for me, of course, it's head of the class for the reasons that I said, you know.
You were going to say it, yeah.
We've talked about how, you know, I always say it when we deal with anything that had to do with like creative people and the creative process, even though it was a dumb sitcom thing, I really latched onto as a kid, and I still do. And yeah, even though it is so silly, starting up that conversation and getting you to think about, you make decisions about modernizing a play or doing something different, and then people butt up against it, and you have to strike that balance of like, well, I want people to like it, but I also want to do the things that I want to do that I find interesting. And just it being an episode of Head of the Class that gets them out of the classroom and gets that different dynamic where Mr. Moore is the one being vulnerable. Just all of that made it really, really fun. And again, of course, you know, Frasier was very fun because of the Jacoby stuff and everything. Yeah. But definitely, yes, love that episode of Head of the Class.
So Derek Jacobi, he is the same guy that's in that like People Under the Stairs movie that we watched. He's like
not in People Under the Stairs. He's in Dead Again. He's in the movie Dead Again, also a Kenneth Branagh movie, but non-Shakespeare. Great thriller from the early 90s.
Okay, because I feel like I've seen him as like a bad guy in things.
That is a spoiler, but yes, he ends up being the bad guy in the 1991 thriller Dead Again.
Every time I see this guy in random other things, because he does appear, you know, as like guest stars and things, and I'm always like, God, he's a bad guy. Like I just have this like feeling that he's a bad guy.
He's a Branagh buddy, so he was in a lot of his 90s movies.
As the show has gotten on, as this episode has gotten on, your G at the end of Branagh has gotten harder and harder. So I too enjoyed Frasier, but I'm a fan of the show Frasier in general. This one would not be like a top 10, you know, even top 20 Frasier episode for me, because two of my favorite characters, like the thing I love best about Frasier is when the four like kind of family members are all interacting, because I think that it's so good and they're also like interesting and they have good, you know, good timing, good rapport, good chemistry. It's great. Jane Leaves is out on, I'm assuming, a maternity leave or something. She's not there at all. And not a lot. I think we get like one scene with Martin. So I was kind of like, all right. I mean, still a fun show. I enjoyed the farcical ending, but here it comes. I liked Gilligan's Island.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. I really enjoyed it for all of the reasons that we do this show. And you're not wrong that moment in Happy Days is exactly like that moment where the whole thing turned and it was like, stop, wait, we're going to talk about suicide in the most sitcom-y way we can possibly talk about suicide in 1974. Like that moment, I was like, I got excited. I was like, what is about to happen? This is fantastic. Loved that moment. But from start to finish, Gilligan's Island was campy, kitschy, sitcom ridiculousness. It was joyful. I loved the fact that they were like, you know, coming up with these crazy, silly, rhyming songs that like have nothing, like none of Shakespeare's language, like using like to be or not to be is the only words, you know, that they put into the funny songs. I loved that. I thought it was so great. I loved that we got to see Ginger doing all these crazy characters and having wigs, which that's a kind of a normal thing for her. But yeah, it was so much fun, even to see Mrs. Howell without her crazy high eye makeup. So Mrs. Howell has Botox face before there was Botox, and I love looking at her. I find it so fascinating. The amount, like the distance between her eyelashes and her eyebrows is huge. And so the only way I think you get that is if you like are drawing on your eyebrows just like higher than they are, or maybe you've like had your eyes done and you've had like a facelift or whatever it is. I don't know, but it is, and she always fills that space with this like kind of shimmery blue, like dark, kind of darkish, shadowy makeup. But when she was doing the Queen, when she was playing the Queen, all of that was gone and she had more of like a fresh face, like a clean face. She looked 20 years younger. I was like, wow, Mrs. Howell, you look good. Like, I like this. This is the right look for you. Anyway, I was enjoying all of Gilligan's Island for all of the silliness. And we got to see their Flintstones mobile for the first time ever. They had this like, I'm sure it's probably a golf cart that's like all tricked out, you know, like covered in bamboo. But when they took an inside shot of it and it's like a pedal, it's like a bike,
and they
right?
speed up the footage whenever they're riding it.
And they speed up the footage anytime they're riding it. And so it's kind of moving fast, but it looks like a Flintstones car. I love it. Everything about that was so much fun. Watching Phil Silvers do his crazy shtick. Like, I hope he got an Emmy nom for that, but I'm sure he didn't because everybody hated Gilligan's Island. But
the biggest snub of 72 or whatever this was.
Right, 1966. I have no notes. Yay, Gilligan's Island on this episode.
Yeah, these were all really fun, and I will just give another random shout out. If you do like Shakespeare stuff from the 90s, it's an underseen gem, the Kenneth Branagh Love's Labor's Lost version with it's got Branagh
Matthew
himself.
Lillard,
I was just going to say, it's got Branagh himself and Alejandro Nivola as the main characters, and they're really, really good. But then it's also got this great 90s cast like Alicia Silverstone and Matthew Lillard. Yeah, it's really, really fun and a bizarre approach to it. It's like Shakespeare by way of an old Hollywood musical. It's definitely not for everybody, but it's like one of my favorite movies ever. Love's Labor's Lost from like 1999 or 2000. But so much for the sitcom Shakespeare. What are we talking about next week?
Next week, we are anticipating nuptials.
Okay.
We are going to watch I Love Lucy, season 2, episode 14. Ricky has labor pains. All in the Family, season 2, episode 24, Maude. Martin, season 3, episode 25, The Bachelor Party. Now maybe you're kind of getting a clue. And Parks and Rec, season 5, episode 10, Two Parties.
Yep, we got bachelor parties, bachelorette parties, bridal showers, all that stuff next week. Until then, we will consider this segment of the sitcom study concluded. Thank you for listening to the Sitcom Study. Tell us what you think or share your own TV tropes and topic ideas by sending a self-addressed stamped email to sitcomstudypodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook or Instagram. And if you like the show, consider leaving a rating or review on your podcast app. It helps us boost those precious Nielsen ratings. The Sitcom Study is recorded in front of a live studio dog.